Good to have you back again for another classic film review. We've chosen a film this time which is fun, light, very entertaining and ultimately completely charming. It's a film you may not have heard of and you're even less likely to have seen. It's a film from 1932 called 1 Hour With You. This film was a musical which unfortunately arrived on the scene at a time when musicals were in steep decline. Talkies had begun in 1927 with a film called The Jazz Singer, and being a musical and being incredibly popular at the time, studios mistakenly thought that there was a big appetite for musicals. There wasn't, and many failed at the box office. It wasn't until 1933 when Busby Berkeley arrived and produced a film by the name of 42nd Street that the musical was reborn, and that led into the heyday of Hollywood musicals into the 40s and 50s. This is a film that stars Maurice Chevalier. Maurice had started his life as an acrobat, but a very serious accident ended that part of his career. He then became a song and dance man and appeared in a number of short films in France pre-World War I. After the war, Chevalier returned to filmmaking in France, and then with the advent of talkies in the late 20s, made his way to Hollywood to try and start a career there. He was initially paired with Jeanette MacDonald in a number of musicals. They ended up making 4 films together. Jeanette MacDonald had followed her sister to New York in 1920 and made her way on the musical stage. She'd appeared there for several years before Hollywood called. She was called to do screen tests in 1927 by Paramount, but at that time she was rejected. Later, Ernst Lubitsch saw some of these screen tests and picked her up, and he was the one who initially paired her and Maurice Chevalier. Now, as I said, musicals went into decline in the early 1930s, and when that happened, Paramount dropped Jeanette MacDonald's contract about the time they finished shooting on 1 Hour With You. Ernst Lubitsch, this film's producer and director, had done pretty much everything, both on the stage and in relation to filmmaking. By 1914, he was writing, directing, and producing and starring in a lot of his own films, and they were relatively successful back in Germany. He moved to the US in 1923, and he made a series of successful silent films for Warner Brothers, and later a series of successful talkies for Paramount. Lubitsch was greatly admired. His films were considered very smart, very clever, very engaging, and they were said to have the Lubitsch touch. One of my favourite filmmakers, a fellow by the name of Billy Wilder, whenever he got stuck with a particular story element or during the shooting of a film, he would stop and ask himself, what would Lubitsch do? And the answer to that question was often the source of inspiration for the solutions he found to make the great films that Billy Wilder made as well. This film is what's called a PreCode film. It refers to American films that were made between 1930 and 1934. By 1934, the Hays Code had come in and provided very strict rules as to how films could be made, what could and couldn't appear on screen for audiences. Now, in this pre-code period, filmmakers in Hollywood still weren't comfortable or even familiar with playing by the rules or sticking within the restrictions that were outlined by the code. As a result, they made a lot of films which started to push boundaries. They were a little bit cheeky, they were a little bit risque, they were very suggestive without necessarily being very overt in the way they did things. And this is a really, really good example of films from that particular period. Now, what's also clever about this film is it does a lot of innovative things. There's a number of musical numbers which are quite engaging. There's also periods in which the dialogue turns to rhyme, and it's a little bit off-putting, but it really gets your attention, and it's really a very charming element of the film as well. There's an unwritten rule in filmmaking that you don't break the fourth wall. There's an imaginary wall between us, the audience, and the people on screen, the actors. And the idea is for them to maintain that particular illusion. Breaking the fourth wall involves actually looking directly at the camera, speaking directly to the audience. It isn't done very often. Sometimes it isn't done very well. But in this very early example of breaking the fourth wall, it's very innovative, it's very clever, and it adds to the fun-loving nature of the film. It's brilliantly done.
Darling!
That's for me. Sweetheart! That's for her. I'll be with you in a minute. That's for both of us. Vive la France.
Now, this film does deal with a difficult subject area, infidelity, and it gets away with that from the perspective of the 1930s, but also from the perspective of it being a very heavy subject area, because it is very light and very playful. Things turn out fairly well in the end for everyone as well. In some ways, this is unconvincing, but again, given the fun-loving nature of the film, we give the filmmaker and the film itself a great deal of levity, and I think it works well. So again, what I'd encourage you to do is to follow the link, go to the website, you'll find a link there to watch this particular film. Watch it. Again, let us know what you think. Come back and leave some comments. It is a fairly short film, but it's a very enjoyable film. It's a film that always leaves me smiling. I really love it and I really enjoy it, and I hope you will too. And I hope we see you again soon for another Classic Films review.